wars that many of which Australia has been involved in. The Labor Party was the party that introduced mandatory detention. The Labor Party now supports vote turnbacks. Isn't it time now, having seen what we've seen or knowing what we know about what is happening to these people, including children, that this policy is immediately abandoned, and that Australia...
So I know that Tilda wants to speak to this, but I'll invite any of the other candidates as well. I'm sorry, what was the end of the question? What was it?
Isn't it time that Australia sticks to the United Nations mantra, International Human Rights Commission, Convention on Refugees?
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to answer that because that is actually an issue that is very close to my heart, and regardless that my opinion doesn't matter as... however, what we're dealing with here is a humanitarian issue more than a political issue, and what I would ask everybody is to put yourselves in the shoes of these people who perhaps have had a gun to their head and are now in detention, and we are not meeting world standard human rights here. And action does need to be taken, and what I will say to you is, this is the entire reason that I am standing for online direct democracy, because we have the opportunity to vote online, and your majority is taken straight to Parliament to represent the people. It is a matter of injustice and human rights.
Thank you, Tilda. Peter.
Look, I think it's just wrong. It's time to close down Manus and Manus Island and Nauru camps. We've got to end this offshore detention business and end the military detention. Just think of it. You know, if you go back in the sort of World War II scenario, you know, and you're under occupation, and as an act of deterrence, a whole bunch of the community, children, mothers, grandmothers, everybody is detained indefinitely and punished to send a message of deterrence. I mean, all of us can see that this is morally wrong. Why can't we see that this is exactly what Labor and Liberal governments are doing on Manus and Nauru? I think it's just wrong. It needs to close down. Mandatory detention needs to be stopped.
Thanks, Pip, for that question. It's actually the question, excuse me, the conversation with people who say we're thinking about voting Green in this electorate have had with us most, and it's important to say that because it is one of the strongest points of differentiation, and people genuinely don't understand how there can't be another way. And the answer is, of course there is another way. We cannot continue with the way we have, and I know there's authors in the room tonight. I was at the launch recently of the reports about some of the sexual assaults that are happening on Manus and Nauru. The case of the Somalian refugee who had an epileptic fit and was raped while she was having an epileptic fit, and then the Australian government sent her to PNG to have an abortion where abortions are illegal because they wouldn't bring her to Australia. For us to have gotten to this place and to say this is a humanitarian response, something that you can only conclude that this is intended to be such a deterrent that we are willing as a country to torture people to say don't get on a boat at a time when there are more people seeking asylum than there have ever been in the history of the world since World War II. I agree with one of the refugee speakers who said this current policy is akin to boarding up the windows of a burning building and saying, we protected you because we stopped you from jumping out the window. Yeah. We have to have a genuine regional processing. We must close the camps, and I feel like every conversation I have with people, this kind of shame carrying around going, there has to be another way, and it has to happen now. We just have to do it.
Thanks very much. This is one of the most difficult areas of government policy. It's actually true that there have never been more people displaced around the world at the moment. The new figures came out a couple of days ago. 65 million people, as I said earlier, 1 in every 113 people on the planet is internally displaced, fled their homes, for some reason isn't safe at home. In the face of that, we need to be a more compassionate country. That's why we support doubling the humanitarian intake. But I'll tell you, the idea that it is compassionate to let people get on boats and risk their lives and pay a people smuggler is not right. And
Why not stop burning Indonesian boats when they arrive here? Then they can send new boats and they can go back.
We've got a question queue up here, so.
yeah. When we were in government, we proposed an arrangement where people who came to Australia would be sent instead to Malaysia, and we would take 4 refugees from Malaysia for every person that was sent. That would have stopped the boats. People would have been able to live in Malaysia, not in camps, but in the community. They had work rights, their children would be in school, they had healthcare funded by Australia. The Greens and the Liberals teamed up to vote against that. That is what genuine regional processing looks like. That is genuine regional processing. Now, that was a difficult thing to propose. It was a difficult thing to arrange with Malaysia, but that's what genuine regional processing looks like. We, as well as saying that we would double the humanitarian intake, we say that there should be an extra $450 million support for the UNHCR. The UNHCR is at the front line of looking after the 65 million people who are displaced around the world. We say that there should be an end to temporary protection visas. You may have seen the front page of the Telegraph the other day pretending this was new. This has always been Labor policy. We say that children should have an independent children's advocate. We say that there should be mandatory reporting of child abuse and neglect, not the sacking of organisations that speak up about child abuse. So it is a large and difficult and complex problem, but it is not enough to say that we can allow people smugglers to extort money from vulnerable people. It is not compassionate to do that. And I can tell you, it is an issue that comes up in this electorate a lot. But there is also a broader Australian community that are concerned about the loss of life and about the number of people that came at the end of our time in government. There's no question that that is that feeling in the community too. It's not just one feeling in our community about this. I know I'm answering a little bit long, but this is a very important thing. We also believe that we need a stronger aid program, because one of the things pushing people to leave their homes is, look at the Rohingya refugees, for example, from Myanmar. They are some of the poorest people on the planet. But, you know, about half of the people who are newly made refugees in the last year are people who are fleeing Syria. And one of the things that I haven't understood up till now about the Greens policy, and perhaps Sylvie would like to talk about this in her response, is if we agree that as a world community, as a global community, we have a responsibility to protect. If we say that the slaughters that happened in Rwanda, that happened in Kosovo, when the world community stood by and allowed them to happen, were wrong, that we have an internationally recognised doctrine, recognised by the United Nations, of responsibility to protect, how can we not then be involved in protecting the people who are fleeing Daesh, IS, or one of the 1,000 groups that are on the ground in Syria now?
Pushing them back.
Sorry, Tom, I think you want to speak. I'm hoping you're actually going to speak and not ask another question of a candidate, if you would mind. Thank you.
I'll be very quick. I'd like to appeal to the discompassionate. Offshore detention costs more than simply letting people in or putting them on a plane back home. It's as simple as that. And, you know, you stop torturing them.
Can I just do a quick sense check, because it's now 8:30. Candidates have been here for an hour and a half. Are the candidates happy to stay for a little longer? Okay, all right, a little bit longer? All Right, we'll put a cut-off at 9 o'clock if we haven't finished by then. But I'm going to ask the gentleman with the red hat. He's going to be the last man that'll ask a question, but I would ask each of you to actually ask quick questions and the candidates quick responses, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Quick responses would be good, because I would actually like to hear from all the candidates on this one. We heard earlier that there is well over $2 billion of federal funding for WestConnex that will still not be paid until after the election. We've heard, I don't think anybody had any praise for it. I think everybody criticised the project quite heavily. What I'd like to know is if you or any of your party's representatives are elected, would your party actually move to halt that flow of funds, particularly while the federal audit is going ahead? And could you please briefly explain why your party is taking that stance?
First of all, I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I probably won't get elected in this election. So it's a bit of a moot point. I'd just like to reinforce the point that I made in my talk, that the mistakes that have been made with WestConnex are in danger of being repeated all over Sydney in the next 50 years. And that's the main thing that we're trying to stop.
Thank you, Chris. Philip?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
It's just what would your
the
party
federal
actually...
funding? Yes.
There's $2 billion that has not yet been paid over. If you were elected, would your party stop the funding?
Okay, well, as I've said, our one policy is to represent the people. So it would be up for the vote, and majority would go directly to Parliament. Okay?
Is it a vote for everyone, or you could have voted for this electorate?
The question was, it's not clear, Tula, whether or not, when you're asking people to vote, whether it will be, as the representative for Sydney, as an example, that you would only get people from Sydney to vote, or is it anyone can vote from across the country for the questions? So just very quickly.
Okay, in this particular instance, it is for the seat of Sydney, yes.
So we can all vote.
But we do have candidates around the country, and basically it is national, it's online. Anybody can vote on Polyweb.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
It's not an official policy of ours, but it sounds reasonable.
I don't think it can be stopped. It's a $2 billion loan that the Liberal government federally has already agreed with the Liberal government in New South Wales. It doesn't have to be paid back till 2021, which, you know, begs the question, why do they need to make the loan now? There's a $1.5 billion grant, all but $300 million of that has been paid. That money is gone now. In yesterday's state budget, the state government put $2.9 billion into WestConnex. That money is additional. There's a $3.4 billion surplus in the state budget. If you don't think that the state government would just replace the $300 million that we wouldn't put in, then I think you're kind of fooling yourselves. This is a Liberal state government project that they are determined to proceed with. And I have to say, it was actually Anthony Albanese who wrote to the Auditor General on the Greens. The Auditor General responded to Anthony Albanese's letter agreeing to...
He responded to everybody.
Agreeing to an inquiry. I'm not sure what happened with the Greens letter, but the Auditor General responded to Anthony's letter agreeing to the inquiry.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you. It should come as no secret, the Greens have already moved in Parliament to halt the funding federally, state, and we did it on local council too. We did it several times. We also wrote to the Auditor General. I moved that through American Council. So it's great when there's consensus and that we are getting the project audited. But money, I mean, you guys know in the Know WestConnex Action Group, it's all over your website. You are very closely tracking this. The money hasn't all been handed over. And you also know the history of these projects, that they have previously moved very close to doing some of these legs of these particular projects, and the community has beaten them back. And it took the community and the Greens winning over Labor, quite frankly, in Victoria, after the contracts had been signed, to get the agreement to rip up these contracts. If we're going to defeat WestConnex, we need a commitment from the major parties, including Labor as well as the Greens. Hopefully we'll get the Liberals, but I think that's less likely. And that means inside Parliament and outside Parliament, the Greens will continue to work with you guys to throw everything at it. We can win this. We're not giving up.
The funding should be I mean, but the real question is who wins the elections. If it's a Labor government, the substantive question is, will the Labor government reverse this funding? You know, and I mean, it has been done, as was said. That was how the East-West was defunded, and you had to break a contract. You know, are you up for it? That's the question.
Yeah.
We don't have any official policy on it. From a personal point of view, I've seen again and again where these projects come in, all hail to the modern car, individual car, and find that they quickly clog up because they're actually creating a marketplace, and that just becomes jammed. And we're talking about $1 billion, what is it, about $2.25 billion yet to be allocated? That doesn't have to be allocated, it's up to the federal election result there. So basically, from a personal point of view, I'm against it.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
I also have a question on WestConnex for Tanya and Sylvie, but since Sylvie mentioned our Women on Nauru report that I was one of the authors of, if anyone wants to see that, it is online. And I can say the woman who was raped on Nauru while she was unconscious was fleeing rape in Somalia and was sent to Nauru as a rape victim. Anyway, on WestConnex. I would also, just as preliminary, say that every document, every piece of information from WestConnex has the federal government logo on it and the state government logo. Now, Tanya, you said that you have a lot of problems with WestConnex, and in particular with its planning. And Anthony Albanese, the Shadow Minister of Infrastructure, has said that he believes in evidence-based planning for infrastructure. So I'd like to ask you, on what basis did Labor in 2013 promise 1.8 billion, that's 300 million less than Abbott's government actually eventually confirmed, 1.8 billion to the WestConnex on the basis that it will go straight into the CBD? And on what basis does that continue to be Labor Party policy? On what evidence do you base that policy? And on what evidence does Shorten base his continuing support for the WestConnex? And Sylvie, I'd like to ask you, if you happen to be elected to federal Parliament, what could you in practice do, and what would you do to attempt to stop the WestConnex? Because it's quite clear that the overwhelming majority, and in fact many of Western Sydney, do not support the WestConnex.
We put about $50 million into a transport study that looked at transport needs across Sydney, including getting freight out of Port Botany. And we haven't put, no Labor government has put, federal government has put $1 into the construction of WestConnex. There's $300 million yet to be paid out of the massive amount that the federal Liberal government have put into this project. That $300 million is not going to make the difference between this being built and not being built. There's a $3.4 billion surplus in yesterday's state budget. So yes, I think this is a badly designed, badly planned and not transparent project. The money was rushed out the door by the Liberals in the same way they tried to rush the money out the door on the East-West project in Melbourne. What stopped that was not the Greens, it was the election of a Labor government. Daniel Andrews made that a commitment of a state Labor party. They were elected and they managed to stop the project. Just on the point of what individuals can do in Parliament, we've got 2 Greens MPs in the state Parliament who made a commitment before the last state election that they would stop this project. The fact that there are 2 of them and they haven't been able to stop this project shows that it's very difficult for individual members of Parliament, 1 or 2 or even half a dozen, to stop a project like this.
That's why
Thanks, Wendy. So it's actually that I know that that's one of the questions, if I had more time I would have said it, that why vote Green question is about that question of what can a Green do in Parliament, and WestConnex is one of those. And I would disagree with Tanya that I think people around here who are represented by Jenny Leong or who are represented by Jamie Parker, they know absolutely they get stronger representation on their local issues getting an activist MP in that parliament, and absolutely that parliament is more progressive because Jenny Leong is elected and Jamie Parker is elected. We have seen one of the strongest advocates of stopping WestConnex in Jenny Leong, and I think a lot of people in this room would agree with that. Obviously the Greens are going to support a Labor government if a Labor government is elected, but geez, I'd much rather have a Labor government elected with a genuine activist, strong, progressive group of Greens saying we're going to negotiate on these issues and really stand up for our community, rather than that's someone else's problem. So, I think people don't need to do that just on rhetoric. Around here, this was the first place the Greens were elected on local council. You've got 2 state reps. You can make that decision about whether you see that kind of activist approach to Parliament that works inside and outside being a strong voice for you. That's how you should vote on election day.
Hello, I'll try and keep this quick. Tanya, you've got your wish. I'm agreeing with the question about Syria. I've got to kind of ask this in 2 parts. As you've indicated, you support continued military operations, and that would obviously be in line with the US government. However, because of the entanglements they've got themselves into in the Middle East, some of them dating back to the Cold War, some of them which are much more recent, there seems to be emerging 3 separate American policies. One is the official US government policy, which is basically supporting some of those ISIS-like groups that you were talking about via supporting the GCC countries and Turkey. One of them is coming out of mostly the Defence Department, who's putting troops on the ground with the Kurdish militia, the YPG. Now, that militia is loosely affiliated with the PKK, who are over the border declared a terrorist organisation by their biggest regional NATO ally, Turkey. And the other one is coming out of the DIA, which seems to be, without doing it directly, I think it was a slight
I'm hoping there's a question that's coming.
There is a question.
We've got lots of acronyms.
But is the Defence Intelligence Agency, who seems to be trying to funnel in military intelligence to the Assad government. I understand the Labor Party support the US in their adventures in Syria. My question is, which US policy do you support?
Again, very difficult to answer this with a yes or a no. Our involvement is actually largely in Iraq rather than Syria. And the reason we have supported not the US but the international coalition in Iraq is because the government of Iraq, which is, for all its flaws, a democratically elected government, has asked us to. I know that a lot of people are very concerned about our involvement there because 2003 was such a disaster for Australia, for the coalition partners, but most particularly for the people of Iraq. And in fact, I think a lot of people would argue that the growth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the antecedent of Daesh or IS, has grown from the ashes, I suppose, of what was left of Iraq after the invasion, the fight against Saddam Hussein. The reason that we support action in Iraq is because the organisation most closely involved with the attacks on Iraq, IS, is by its own description a genocidal organisation. It actually seeks to wipe out particular ethnicities and particular religions. The Yazidis are one example. They say that they're Satan worshippers and that there should be no tolerance of them. Their war crimes are very well described and documented, so I'm not going to go through them today, other than to say, if you accept that the international community has a responsibility to protect, then when the proper procedures are gone through, then Australia should be part of that global response. When a democratically elected government asks for help in protecting its people from a non-state actor that is unequivocally brutal, then Australia should be involved in that. What I say is that there should be constraints around that involvement. First of all, this should have been debated in our Parliament. I think it's the sort of thing that where every member of parliament should have the opportunity to speak and put on the record their position and the reasons for their position. There should be constraints around the behaviour of both the Iraqi security forces and any militia forces that they work with. If you look at what's happening with Fallujah now and Mosul next, there are real concerns about what might happen with militia involvement. So we should not be involved if the militias are allowed free rein with all of the problems. Sorry, I know it's a very complex problem. You can't say we need to protect people from imminent threat of mass atrocity crimes, which is actually the situation on the ground there, and not be prepared to be involved in the way that we are.
Thank you. I'd like to address this question to all the candidates because I asked this question for my friends living Altamore relevant area. They'd like to know our candidate stance on that. So quite a number of Australians actually went to China for organ transplant and just waited for a few weeks to get a vital organ like kidney, liver, and heart. And they didn't realize that their heart actually, this organ actually coming from the killing of prison of conscience, being killed, and the organ sold for profit. So SBS actually broadcast a documentary last year showing investigation evidence that more than 40,000 organs in China's organ transplant has no explained sources and may come from the killing of the prison of conscience, such as the meditation group of Hong Kong.
So your question is, what is their position on that situation?
Yeah, my question is actually, European Parliament and the US House of Representatives already passed a resolution to urge China to stop organ harvesting. So if you are elected, what do you think your party and our government can do to balance the human rights with trade with China and help Chinese government respect human life, stop organ harvesting, and also warn Australia?
I think we're very clear on what the question is. I'm just going to stop you there and ask the candidates to answer. Thank you.
We don't have an official policy on this issue, but if you want me to say that I'm opposed to organ harvesting and I would like to see it stopped, I'm very happy to say that.
What I would suggest is perhaps that education for Australian people going over to China for organ donations should be a priority, and that is something we can certainly bring up for the vote with online direct democracy. So that is my
Thank you,
response.
Tula. I'm just going to keep reading through, sorry.
I would support an official condemnation of the practice. I'm not sure I can say more on the matter.
Well, I support strong statement against organ harvesting. I have raised the issue of human rights in China with President Xi Jinping when he was here. Again, it was raised yesterday at the National Press Club with the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop talking about the rights of journalists and others, particularly in Hong Kong at the moment. I just have to say, I am 100% opposed to the death penalty for any crime anywhere. And I've also, as well as raising it with China, raised it with the United States, which is another country that is a close friend in many ways of Australia, but has an extraordinary use of the death penalty. And we need to do better with organ donation rates in Australia, and I did a lot of that when I was Health Minister.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I've got much to add, and obviously that the Greens would have, I think, been public on this issue, but obviously I think everyone on the panel knows it, and it is a challenging question in terms of our engagement with China as a large partner. I think the Greens have been on the record in terms of how we move forward broadly with international relations, that we want to have less involvement directly with the US, and we question the US alliance, and it's more important to engage with partners directly, separately from that, including with other large global powers such as China.
Yeah, I think an Australian government should definitely condemn and oppose not just forced organ transplants, but all human rights abuses. And it must absolutely be de-linked from trade relations. And this applies to China as to any other country. We have to have a human rights policy that stands on its own principles.
It's a slightly you may know there's a book called a study called the China Study, which